All right, what's up everybody? Welcome back to yet another video. So today I'm gonna be breaking down for you guys, how do you choose a product management role when they're all just completely different? So I've been lucky enough to have been a product manager at 3 different companies in Silicon Valley, and trust me, they were all completely different roles, partially because of the different types of companies they were, but also partially because of the roles and the cultures that were, kind of formed in those companies. So today I'm gonna abstract that out for you guys and give you guys some takeaways on when you're looking at a new role, what do you sort of look for and what questions can you ask to figure out if this is the right fit for you. You'll often hear how product managers say that product management is different at every single company, and yeah, that's totally true. It's like picking a bean out of that Harry Potter Birdie Bots every flavor beans.
I lost. Earwax.
You never know what you're gonna get. For example, some PM roles work really closely with engineering, and a lot of the strategy actually comes from upper management, and then your job might be a lot more on the execution side and figuring out the details of how to figure out that plan. But then also some other roles are a little bit more on the figuring out the strategy side, like how do you know what to work on? Like how do you understand the users, figure out the opportunities in the product, and then figure out what the right thing to work on is, build that roadmap out. And so that's just one example of how it can be really different at different companies depending on the culture you're in. I'll be basing my thoughts off of 3 companies that I worked at, and just to give you guys full disclosure of what those are, I worked at eBay for registration, sign-in, and profile page, so that's a consumer product. Then I worked at Yelp, which is, I was working on Yelp reservations, so that was actually a business product. And then I actually worked at Brava, which is a startup that works on an intelligent connected oven. So it's a hardware product, but I worked on the software part of that, so the web and mobile apps that accompany that. So I want to break it down, when you're looking at a new job opportunity, how do you figure out if this is something that is relevant for you and something that you would be successful in? All right, let's get started. So the first one is the size of the company. I know this one's a little bit obvious, but I think it's super different if you're working at a company with hundreds of product managers versus if you're working at a startup with maybe 3 product managers. Because if you're working at a company with hundreds of product managers, you'll have lots of mentors, you'll have lots of people that have the process figured out, and you can kind of copy paste process across teams sometimes and then edit it a little bit to figure out what works for that specific team. So you'll have a lot of those things figured out, which is kind of nice. At a startup, if you're maybe let's say 2 or 3 product managers, then you'll have a lot more open-endedness in your process. You'll have probably a lot more things to figure out. You'll be wearing more hats. So for example, a lot of times if you're working at a startup, they might not have a dedicated content writer to write some content is exactly like the words that will appear on the app or on the web page. So you might not have someone that does that, or you might not have someone that is a dedicated UX researcher, or sometimes even a UX designer, and you might be doing mock-ups yourself. So at a startup with maybe fewer product managers, you might also be wearing more hats because there's just fewer people around to take up those kind of little pieces. So I think there's pros and cons, obviously. If you're working at a bigger company, everybody will know exactly what your company does and what your product is. But at a smaller company, you might be learning a lot of different skills, and you become really versatile in your skill set. Okay, the next thing to think about is the business model. So there's subscription-based business models like Netflix and Spotify. You pay a monthly fee and then you get their service. Then there's also ad-based business models like Google, Facebook, Yelp, YouTube. Those are all ad-based, and that's how they earn money. And then there's e-commerce models. So things like Lyft or Airbnb, where they earn a slight fee off of every transaction. And I think each of those business models might affect how your role as a product manager will actually turn out. So having an e-commerce type business model is great for PMs who are working on getting users from point A to point B. So for example, let's take Amazon for example. So a lot of the PMs at Amazon try to get the user from opening the Amazon app to having a product in their home, in their hands. So that's point A to point B, and you as a PM might own just the checkout page, or there might be 10 PMs that work on the checkout page, but you own a small sliver of that, and a lot of the people around you will have similar goals to you. So comparing that to more of a subscription-based business model, those metrics are gonna look totally different. It's gonna be less getting people through a conversion funnel, but more how do you get more people to know about Netflix? How do you get people to get more engaged on Netflix? How do you get people to cancel their Netflix subscription less? So things like that are a little bit more of what you'll be looking at for a subscription-based product. And sometimes that means it's gonna be less scientific of a job and you'll be working more on hypotheses. So for example, Netflix doesn't know if a new season of Stranger Things is gonna lift their metrics or not, but they're gonna make that next season and then see how that impacts and then learn from that so they can make future predictions based off of that. And lastly, there's the ad-based business model. So, this is companies like Google, Facebook, YouTube. So a lot of the PMs at these companies work on trying to give users a great experience so that the users become super loyal to that product. Because if you're super loyal to YouTube, for example, then you're eventually gonna be clicking an ad and you'll find one of those ads relevant. So the two metrics that people look at for companies like this are one, something that is kind of a number of users that's using the product, so monthly active users or daily active users, and then something like ad revenue or how much money are they currently earning through ads. And the interesting thing for these kinds of products is that it's a really delicate balance between these two, right? Because if you had Instagram and you see 100% ads, that's not gonna be a good experience for you as a user. But if you had 0 ads, then they would be making no money. So there's obviously a nice balance there that the company has to operate within and kind of figure out where that fine line is. I should also probably asterisk here that I've never actually worked on an ad-based product like this. So if I'm missing something, please comment down below and that would be lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next thing to ask is who is the user and do you care about them? So are they a business? Are they an everyday consumer like you and me? Is it a special situation? Like maybe a parent is the one who buys a game for their kid, so the user is actually a kid, but the person who's buying it is the parent. So kind of figure out what do you care about and is that product something you care about? This is important, especially as a PM, because as a PM, it's your job to be really focused on the user, understand your users, your customers, and their needs. So if you're working on a business product, you'll also probably have sales and account managers within your company, which is really awesome because a lot of their job is to talk to customers and understand their needs. So you'll be having great people to talk to and relate with on what are the needs of your product. So that will be in addition to being able to look into the data, look into user research, and be able to piece that together to figure out what is the best strategic direction for your product or your company. And for either business products or consumer products, you'll hopefully have a user researcher to help you run focus groups or conduct user interviews. And you might also have analytics or an analyst to help you kind of analyze data at a higher level and kind of go deeper into figuring out why people are doing certain things. Okay, the next thing to think about is where does strategy come from? Is it more top down or bottoms up? Some companies are super top down, meaning the executives come up with the overall vision and then that vision gets trickled down into the teams underneath them. And then some are a lot more working in kind of autonomous teams that suggest things to their executives and then eventually certain ideas get approved and then those ideas get funded or like kind of move forward with getting built out. And there's obviously pros and cons to each of these methods. So for example, in a tops down company, you can work on really big initiatives. So for example, Apple is known to be a little bit more tops down, and that's how they're able to make these really big leaps on phones every year, right? Because those are really big initiatives where if one team is kind of suggesting ideas, then those bigger themes won't be able to get built out. All right, next up is working with engineering. So will you have a dedicated team or a shared team? What is the ratio of PMs to engineers? What's the process of getting a ticket from a product manager to an engineer? These are interesting questions that you could even ask in an interview. Working with engineering can be tough, and companies are sometimes all over the place with how they handle this super important relationship. Some companies I've seen have one dedicated product manager to like 5 engineers, and then they kind of team up and they're dedicated to each other. But then other companies have like a bunch of product managers for a bunch of engineers, and then each product manager has specific projects that they actually go through and then like ping whichever engineering team they need to get that project done. So it's super different depending on what company you're at, and you should think about what works well for you. The ratio of PMs to engineers is also an interesting question because sometimes, even though engineers don't technically report to the product manager is still telling them what to do. So it is important to build really good relationships with your engineers. And the process of how engineers pick up that ticket is actually really interesting and sometimes a sticky subject at some companies because sometimes engineers can give pushback and that relationship can get hurt a little bit. So I think it's important to be interested in this question of how does that process look? So that way when you're interviewing at a company or you're deciding if you want to work at a company, you can understand what that relationship is. And I'm gonna make a whole separate video on how to actually make sure that relationship is successful. But for now, I'm just gonna say that it's important to understand that's a factor when you are considering which companies to look at. Okay, so the last thing I want you to take a look at when you're looking at a new role is the experimentation culture of that company. So some companies are really experimentation oriented, so that means they might be running like 5 experiments for every team at any given time. And some companies don't run as many experiments. Maybe it's like one every once in a while, or for most change, they roll it out and just make sure it's stable and it's not really impacting their metrics, but overall, they don't really A/B test as much. So companies that are more experimentation oriented tend to be more data driven and might actually be more bottoms up. So like teams might be contributing more ideas and those ideas actually might be getting prioritized. So if you're that kind of person that like really thrives off of giving ideas and actually having those experimented and tested, then it might be interesting to look for those kinds of companies that are more experimentation oriented. All right, that's all I got for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. So next week, I'm actually gonna be posting a video that I'm really excited about. I'm gonna be explaining some technical skills for product managers. So I'm gonna be starting actually with GraphQL. So it's a technology that is very interesting and I think that a lot of product managers don't really know about it too much, but really should. In the meantime, if you wanna see my take on if product managers need to know how to code, you can look the video right here. And if you wanna see my take on some resume tips that might be helpful for you if you're applying to jobs, you can click the video right here. All right, thank you guys again. I'll see you guys next time.